So our objectives, we have 4 objectives for today's lesson. So it says that by the end of the lesson, the student will be able to, one, explain the historical and linguistic context in which contrastive analysis emerged, particularly its development in the 1950s. So we should be able to tell the history or the historical context in which contrastive analysis emerged, from whence did contrastive analysis come from. Then we also look at the linguistic context. In which linguistic context did they emerge? All right, from its development. So how did they come about? How did they start in the 1950s? So we look at the contributors of contrastive analysis, and these contributors are two. We have Robert Lado, we have C.C. Fries or Charles Carpenter Fries. All right. Then we have to differentiate. We spoke about hypothesis. So contrastive analysis has 2 hypotheses: the strong hypothesis and the weak hypothesis. All right. So we look at the difference between the two. Then we also discuss the role of language comparison in predicting language learning difficulties. So these will be our recommended text reading. So Lado, 1957, and it's language across cultures, not linguistics. It's language across cultures. Then we also have the contributions from Fries, which is titled Teaching and Learning English as a Foreign Language. Okay. So we begin by asking ourselves what contrastive analysis is. Earlier, I asked what contrastive or to contrast means. And our colleague said that to compare 2 things. Yeah, so all that we're looking at here is comparison. So we compare 2 things. Here, they are not things, as in just anything. What are we comparing? Languages. Because whatever we are doing is situated in the context of language. So we're going to contrast languages, basically 2 languages, to find out their differences and their similarities. So when we talk of contrastive analysis, it's an approach to teaching a second language. That is, if you are teaching a language that is not the first language or the native language or the L1 of a certain person, this is one of the approaches that you can use. So what is the whole contrastive analysis approach about, or theory about? So it says that it's a linguistic framework. So basically it's applied in the area of language that compares 2 languages to identify areas of difficulty in second language learning. It is based on the idea that comparing L1 with a certain L2 can predict learner errors. So earlier I mentioned that what we are doing, this course is about teaching second languages, or to some extent foreign languages. So we have, that's why in the text of C.C. Fries, teaching and learning English as a foreign language, because English is a foreign language, I mean, to many of us, but we use it as our second language. All right. So what contrastive analysis says, or what it does, is that, or their contrastive analysis is of the view that if you want to teach a certain foreign language or a second language to a person, you must compare the person's L1 to that of the second language that you want to teach, so that you'll be able to identify the areas that the person will face difficulties. And in doing this, it will help you know what to teach the person. Okay, so for example, let's say You are, let's use what we are teaching, English, which is a second language. We are teaching English as a second language to our students. Okay. So if you are teaching English as a second language to our students, this is what they are saying. This is what contrastive analysis says, that you must compare English language to that of the language of our learners. So if where you are, we have Ghanaian languages that we use in our schools. So you compare it's the dominant language. I mean, in actual fact, it's supposed to be individual's language, not like the group. Because I'm saying this because in our classes, we don't have a homogeneous group. Some are Fanti, some are Gan, some are a whole lot. You know, it's difficult to find a classroom in Ghana where the students are of homogeneous linguistic background. That is to say that their L1 may not be the same. I think it will be hard because in our classroom situations in Ghana, because of the nature of how our geography and all that, you see that in your classroom, you may have someone who is a Fanti, somebody who is an Ewe, someone who is an Equiapim, who is a Gan, and all that. So you have varied language speakers with different L1s. Okay. So CA, when I want to say contrastive analysis, I will say CA. So they are saying that if you want to teach English to students or learners, I should say, not necessarily students as in children, but anyone, you must compare the second language, in this case the English, to that of the person's L1. So let's say the person's L1 is let's say Fanti. It means that you must compare the two languages. You must compare their systems to see which areas are likely to be difficult, to pose a challenge to the learners of the second language. Okay. So it says that it's based on the idea that when you compare the person's native language with the target language, that is the language you are teaching to the learner, it will help you predict the errors that they are likely to make. So this is the assumption of contrastive analysis. So contrastive analysis, once again, is a linguistic framework that compares two languages to identify areas of difficulty in second language learning. They do this because they believe that when you compare these two languages, it will help the teacher predict the errors that the learner is likely to make in the target language, that is a L2. Okay. So having known what CA is about, let's look at where it originated from. So it emerged in the 1950s during the post-World War II era. So here I pause to ask, why do you think that it came after why are we talking about World War II here? Why do you think this approach to teaching second language came about as around this time? Any person? Yes, any idea? Should I call out names? Okay, so let's have Caroline Yeboah, if she can hear us. Caroline Yeboah, what's your thought on this? Why do you think this approach came after Second World War? Okay, so I'm sure Caroline is probably pounding fufu to eat. Okay, so Charles, my namesake, please let's hear from you.
In fact, the reason why this has to come after the World War II is after the World War there was a supremacy from the colonial masters for which we need to learn, or people need to learn their language. For instance, all countries that were colonized by the English-speaking countries,
Mhm.
their masters would like to operate in that area with their
Okay.
language to learn the
Okay.
second.
Okay. Thank you for your opinion. Any other, I mean, contrasting idea? And once again, I must say that we need to talk. So if I mention your name and you refuse to respond, it means that you are not present. Just as when we go to school, we mark our register. There is a way to mark my register. So I will take note of every person whose name is mentioned and does not respond to. So thank you, Charles, for your opinion. So to some extent, yeah. But the main reason this came about during the World War, right after, because the Second World War ended in 1945, and contrastive analysis emerged in the 1950s. So let's say roughly 5 years after the Second World War. When wars occur, we see instances of migration, right? People move. So in Europe, people moved from one country to the other. People moved overseas. Some found themselves in the United States and all that. So there was the need to teach them English language in this context, all right? Well, you know that English language is the language of the world. There's no language that has more speakers than the English language. So after the World War II, there were a lot of people moving across Europe and even beyond Europe to the Americas and all that. So that is the around this time that contrastive analysis emerged. And he says that this came about driven by the increased demand for effective language teaching, especially in the United States. You see, the United States is made up of people from all over the world. I'm sure that when you go to US, you find every national of any country on the surface of the earth there. So it became necessary for effective language. Okay, so it says that it's emerged because it was driven by the increased demand for effective language teaching. It became necessary for people to have effective language teaching, especially in the United States. So this theory has its roots in structural linguistics and behaviorist psychology. So it's important for us to bookmark these two things that we've spoken about here: structural linguistics and behaviorist psychology. All right, we shall come back to them in our later lessons. So the influence, so we've spoken about the origin. We said that it emerged in the 1950s during the Second World War, after the Second World War era, or around the Second World War, when the Second World War ended. And it came about because of the increased demand for effective language teaching, especially in the United States. And it's this contrastive analysis approach is rooted in structural linguistics and behavioral psychology. As I said, we'll come back to these two in our later slide. But what it means is that it's underpinned, it gets its motivation, it gets its method from structural linguistics and behavioral psychology. So we'll come back to look at what structural linguistics is and how it gives strength, or it gives certain principles to contrastive analysis. Then we also look at what behavioral psychology or behaviorism the impact in contrastive analysis. So these are the two theories from which contrastive analysis draws its strength. So the rise of
Yeah,
applied linguistics. Yeah,
please,
hello.
my hand is up. My hand has been up.
Oh, sorry,
I want
sorry.
to, yeah, thank you very much. Please, I didn't hear the reason, the teaching of the L2 was on the rise in the 1950s, which led to this contrastive uh, error analysis
No, contrastive
theory.
analysis.
Yeah, contrastive analysis.
Yeah.
Yes, I heard the reason being teaching of the language
Okay, so we
on
said
the
that.
rise, but what led to that? What led to the teaching of the language
Okay, so the
at that time?
reason given here is there was an increase in the demand. So it became necessary for people that language teaching should be effective. We needed a certain system to teach the language. And we said that the World War II, the World War II era, after the World War II era, influenced this because there were a lot of people who moved, during the war. After the war, people were moving from one country to the other. People needed to find safety in other countries, and especially people travel within Europe and also beyond Europe or across Europe. So people moved to the America and all that. Some people, during this time, some people were set as spies and all that. But after the World War II, there were a lot of people who had migrated, especially to the United States. And that there was a demand for effective language teaching. People now began to think that we needed, or they needed, effective teaching of the language, probably the English language. All right. So we said that the rise in applied linguistics and language teaching methodologies that focus on systematizing language learning. So this CA, contrastive analysis, was influenced by the rise of applied linguistics. So when we talk of applied linguistics, we're looking at how language is actually used in our lives, and also language teaching methodologies that focus on systematizing language learning. So we were looking at how to teach language by looking at how you systematize, you put language into systems and teaching. Because at that time, structural linguistics was a linguistic approach that was, reigning, teaching English by looking at the structure of English, which was also applied in other language contexts. So this applied linguistics, structural linguistics was focused on how to teach language by looking at the system of the language. Okay, so we look at as I said, we'll go back to the whole structural linguistics aspect later. So we mentioned that there are
All
two
right,
key.
thank you.
Please, are you okay?
Yes, please, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. So there are two key contributors, two main people who propounded or came out with contrastive analysis. The first person, perhaps the prominent among the two or between the two, should be Robert Lado. So you look at who Robert Lado was, and we also look at his contributions to the development of contrastive analysis. So, who was Robert Lado? Just as we have Kwame Nkrumah, you mentioned Kwame Nkrumah. You say, who was Kwame Nkrumah? In this context, who was Robert Lado? And some of you say, when you have an argument with some people, you say, do you know who I am? So the person will ask you, who are you? So, who was Robert Lado? So he was a linguist. That is, he was somebody who was into language studies, all right, and was a key proponent of contrastive analysis. So he came out with contrastive analysis when he published his book, Languages Across Cultures. So languages across what cultures in 1957. And it was when this book came out, which gave a form, it made contrastive analysis what official. So the coming out of languages across cultures in 1957 officially outdoored what you call contrastive analysis framework. So what was Lado's contribution? What did he contribute to contrastive analysis? So he claimed that by looking at language structures, so don't forget I mentioned structural linguistics. In structural linguistics, they look at structures. That's what we get the name structural. They look at the structure of a language to teach. So if they want to teach a language, they approach language teaching by looking at the structure of that language. Okay. So we look at these structures. So grammatical structures, morphological structures, and phonological structures. So Lado's idea was that if you want to teach a language, you must compare the languages, their structures. And in doing so, it will help you predict the difficulty that the person that you're going to teach, that language you're going to teach, the difficulty that the person can encounter in that second language. So their view is that you must teach the language by looking at the structure of the language. He therefore said that if you want to teach the language, look at the phonological structures, the morphological structure or structures, and the syntactic structures. By looking at the two languages, the L1 and the L2, the L1 being the language of the one you are teaching, and the L2 being the language you want to teach to the one you are teaching. All right. So they look at focusing on the structures of the two languages. So earlier we said that contrast means to compare, to find out the similarities and the differences. Is anyone who wants to talk? Okay, shall we proceed? Okay, so his idea was that we needed to focus on the phonological and the morphological and also the syntactic differences between the two languages. So, for example, as we said, we all know that we don't have a homogeneous population in our classroom, that the students that we are teaching, they don't all come from the same linguistic background. They don't have the same L1. But if they were from the same linguistic background, if they were all sharing the same L1, what it will mean is that according to contrastive analysts, according to this approach of teaching second languages, what they say is that if we had that situation, then you needed to look at the L1 of your students. Because we don't have a homogeneous population in our classroom, it may be quite difficult. However, we assume that they have similar L1 because of the certain language, wherever we are, there is a dominant L1 there. So we assume that they all speak that language. Okay. So in this case, you assume that the people, possibly they are Fanti speakers. Okay. All of them may not be Fantis, but we are just, using the ideal situation because all over the country we teach a certain local language. So if you find yourself in Accra, in a typical government school in Accra, the local language there is Ga. It doesn't mean that all those in the classroom are Ga speakers, but that is the language, the local language they are using. So let's take, for example, that is the case. It means that you need to compare. Earlier I said, okay, let me use the Ga. It means that you must compare the Ga language to that of the English language. Okay. By comparing, what do you compare? Their structures. What are these structures? phonological structures. That is, if you pick the Ga, you look at the sound system of Ga, you compare it with that of English, you find out their similarities and also their differences. So when you look at the sound system, are there similar sounds that are in Ga and in English? You compare. So by comparing, you come out with the similarities as well as the differences. And the differences will help you predict the errors that a learner of English is likely to make. They also believe that not just the phonological or the sound system, you must also look at phonological structures. How do they form their words? So morphology deals with the structure of words. Okay. So for example, how do they form past tense? In English, we said when it comes to regular verbs, you add ed or d to form the past tense. That is the morphology of English. So you compare that with or to English, the Ga language. So when you pick Ga language, how do they also form their past tense? You compare to see areas of similarities and also areas of what differences. Again, on morphology, in English, you know that we have subject-verb agreement. So where you have plural subjects, they must go with what? Plural verbs. That also deals with morphology, though there is some aspect of syntax. But I'm discussing it here because the form of the word will change. That is the verb, because of the form of the subject. Then again, in morphology, we also talk about forming plural words. Okay, so if you have boy in English, how do we form the plural of, let's say, boy in English? We say you add what? S. So you are looking at the form of the words. So I've spoken about forming past tense. This also is about forming plural. So you also pick the English language, then you compare it with the Ga language, which is the L1 of the people you are teaching the English to. If it is Fanti, you do the same. So by comparing their morphological structures, you come out with the similarities and differences. And this will help you predict the errors that the people are likely to make in learning the second language. Then the third one is the syntactic structures, that is the grammatical differences. So one thing that we can discuss here is how subject verb agreement and also the arrangement of the words. In some languages the subject may come first, followed by the verb and all that. In English we have the typical SV structure, all right? But in some languages maybe the V comes first, followed by the other structures. Okay, so languages differ. How you say one thing, how the grammatical system of a certain language is not the same as another. In some languages a word is equivalent to a phrase. All right, so let's say you may have a single word in ever, but when you translate it into, let's say, tree or Ga or English, you have a whole phrase, sometimes even a sentence. So the syntactic structures of languages are not the same. So once again, what Lado is saying is that if you want to teach a second language, then compare the two languages, that is the L1 and the L2, to find the similarities and differences to help you predict the errors that your learners are likely to commit in the second language. All right. Any question at this point, please? Any question? Okay. So let's proceed. So Okay, so from the Lado's text, that is languages across culture, there is a quote that we like to look at. So it says that we assume that is those who subscribe to contrastive analysis. They assume that the learner tends to transfer the forms and meanings and the distribution of forms and meanings. So the forms and the meanings and the distribution of forms and meanings of their native language and culture to the foreign language and culture. We all learned in our social studies class that element of culture, and one of the key elements of culture is language. You cannot separate one's culture from one's language. You talk about culture, one key thing that you mention is what? Language. As someone said, language. All right. So he says that those who are of contrastive analysis family, they assume that they think that a learner will transfer the forms and meanings of his language or her language and the distribution of forms and meanings of their language, that's their L1, and culture to a foreign language. What does this mean? It means that I was using the guy in the English analysis. So what it means is that if a guy is learning English, there is the Robert Lado and his people are saying that that person will transfer certain forms in Ga, certain meanings in Ga, certain distributions of forms and meanings in Ga to the English language. That is why they are of the opinion that it's important for you to compare the two languages to see how the person will transfer these forms to the language that the target language, that's the language they seek to learn. All right. So that is about Lado. So let's look at carpenter fry. So these are Lado's ideas to contrastive analysis. So let's look at that of carpenter fry's Charles. So who was he? So he was an American linguist. Now, to be clear, let's go back a little about Robert Lado. The name Lado is not a typical American name. Is there anyone here who can guess? Please, the one whose mic is on, please turn it off. So Robert Lado, where do you think the name Lado is likely to come from? Is there anyone? The name Lado, can you guess the origin of this name? Yes, is there anyone? Who? Nobody. Okay, so let's proceed. And please, the one whose microphone is on. Okay, so I see a hand, Shaibu. Shaibu.
Yes, I was to respond. Yeah, please. I was to respond to. I was to give a question,
Shaibu
but not
doesn't
this.
seem to
But I'll try
be
this
with
one
us.
first.
Okay, okay, please. Okay, that's fine. Hello. Okay, so let's have so Shaibu, you come back with your question. Okay. Let's have Ernestine Sunu. Yes.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
I would like to be a bit funny here. It sounds like an ever name. Yeah,
Indeed.
I can
I
relate it
see.
to ever. Yes.
How do I?
Uh,
Okay, so let's hear from Shaibu. Shaibu.
Clever.
Yes. Shaibu. Okay, so it appears Shaibu is not with us. So, but if you can hear me, you can come back with your question, Shaibu. So, of course, Lado is not even a Ghanaian. So, we can't say he's an Ewe, right? So, Robert Lado was actually a Spanish, all right, from Spain, who was born in America and moved to Spain, and he stayed there till he was about in his teen years, all right. Then they moved back with his parents, they moved back to America, where he stayed and all that. So you see that Robert Lado's influence, all right, to contrastive analysis comes from the fact that he was of mixed breed. Someone who was born in America, didn't grow up there, was moved to his original home, which is Spain. He stayed there till he was about in his teen ages. Then he was moved back to America. So you see the link between Robert Lado's ideas and contrastive analysis. So somebody who has English as a language and also speaks what Spanish as a language. So probably he came out with this idea because of his linguistic background. Okay, possibly he transferred certain structures in Spanish to that of English, where he later grew up in the America. All right, so that was just by the way. So let's look at Carpenter Fries. So he was an American linguist and a structuralist. So the structural aspect of contrastive analysis came from him. So he was also a prominent figure in language teaching, how to teach language, whose work influenced Lado's approach. So Lado is the main propounder of contrastive analysis, but he drew his ideas, principles from Carpenter Fries's ideas or his teaching approach. So what was Charles Carpenter Fries's influence? What were his ideas to or his contributions to contrastive analysis? So, one, he was of the view that teaching language should be done through sentence patterns and structural analysis. So, the aspect of structural linguistics influenced Lado in coming out with contrastive analysis approach. So he gave the idea that, or he contributed the idea that language should be done through sentence patterns and structural analysis. He also pioneered the idea that contrasting languages could help in designing teaching materials. So he was of the view that when you compare and contrast two languages to find their similarities and differences, it could help in designing the materials that you use to teach the language that you want to teach. Okay. So we said that contrastive analysis is founded on two theories. One is behaviorism, and the other is structuralism. I want to believe that all of us here did education. We're all education students. I want to assume, and if you're education students, then definitely we might have come out with we might have learned about behaviorism, what others also call environmentalist. All right, environmentalist. So behaviorism. So we learned earlier that when you talk of contrastive analysis, it's rooted in structural linguistics, and not just in structural linguistics, but also in behaviorism. So we look at the behaviorist foundations of contrastive analysis. What role does behaviorism play in contrastive analysis? What is it doing in contrastive analysis? So we will talk about what behaviorism is. First, we need to understand what behaviorism is. then we can link it to contrastive analysis. That is to look at its role in contrastive analysis. So it is a language. The behaviorism view learning as habit formation. All right. So to them, there are certain habits that you pick, and as you are picking these habits, you are learning. So let's look at in our environment. There are certain things that we learned from the environment. That's why we also call them the environmentalists. All right. So they view learning, not language learning per se, but learning in general, as a habit that somebody forms or that is formed in someone from time to time. Okay. So that is the idea. They believe that when we talk of learning, we can view learning as habit formation, something that you form over time. So what is their role here? So based on behaviorism, which views language learning as a process of habit formation through repetition. So they have the view that to learn a language, this is the role behaviorism is playing in contrastive analysis. So they view language learning as a process of habit formation. So to learn a language, they think it is a habit that you are forming through repetition. And I think that we can agree with them to a very large extent, in the sense that when they gave birth to us, no one was speaking tree or fanti or ga or hey, teacher, please mute yourself. So, hello. Okay, so uh, okay, so I was saying that when they gave birth to us, we were not speaking the language of this world. We might have been speaking a certain language, but not definitely that language was not any known language in human existence. All right. How did we learn the language? The English that I'm speaking, how did I learn it? If I'm a behaviorist, I will say that the simple explanation I will give is that I learned it through repetition. I learned it as a habit, something that you do over and over and again, that it becomes part and parcel of you. That is habit. So that is the idea from behaviorism. So they are saying that when learning a second language, learners transfer habit from their L1. You remember the quote from Robert Lado. We assume that the learner tends to transfer the forms and meanings and the distribution of forms and meanings of their native language and culture to the foreign language and culture. So Robert Lado got the idea from behaviorism or behaviorist theory, that they are of the view that in learning a second language, so if you see language learning as a habit formation, that means that when learning a second language, the person is likely to transfer habit from their L1. And when this is done, it can result in both positive and negative transfer. So if the transfer is positive, then it makes learning fast. And if the transfer is negative, it makes the learning of the language what? Difficult. Okay. So if you are learning a second language and it's influenced by your L1, and you are able to transfer positive forms in from your L1 to the L2, it means that it will facilitate the learning. The learning will be smooth. You wouldn't encounter difficulty. But if you are to transfer negative forms, then it will result in what? Errors in the second language. All right. That is why they compare the structures of the two languages to predict the errors. So we spoke about the hypothesis of contrastive analysis. So they have two hypotheses or opinions. We have the strong version and the weak version. All right. So the strong version predicts that. Note.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Hello, sir.
Yes, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Sir, please, I want to ask a question.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Please, I want to know that Carpenter Fries also, was it the one who developed the behaviorism, or what? He also got his idea from that.
Okay, thank you. So all that we are saying is that this is the contribution from. So to answer your question, Carpenter Fries is not a proponent of behaviorism. Okay, he is not a proponent of behaviorism. So I think when you talk of behaviorism, it's been a while, but you can talk of Piaget and all those people. I'm not too sure, but when you read about behaviorism, you can talk about these people. But Charles Carpenter Fries was a linguist. However, we are talking about behaviorism because behaviorism, contrastive analysis, is founded on the principle that language learning is habit formation, which is a principle in behaviorism theory. I hope that's clear. So it was not Charles Carpenter Fries who came out with behaviorism. He is not a proponent. He is a structuralist. Okay. But the whole contrastive analysis approach is founded on the idea that language is a habit formation. So they take inspiration from behaviorism, which sees learning as habit formation. And learning a language is also a form of learning. So they are of the view that if language is a form of learning, learning a language is also a form of learning, then they view that learning process as what? As a habit formation. That is why behaviorism comes in here. They take inspiration from behaviorism. They subscribe to the ideals of behaviorism that language learning is habit formation, something that you must develop, you must form over time. I hope your question is answered.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much.
All right, sure. So the strong version of contrastive analysis says that all errors made by L2 learners can be traced to the difference between L1 and L2. So they predict that all errors made by L2 learners can be traced to differences between L1 and L2. Okay. So the strong version of contrastive analysis, they are saying that, for example, I'll go back to my English and GA. So what they are saying is that if you are teaching English to GA learner, okay, somebody whose L1 is GA, they are saying that all errors that this learner will make in the English language is as a result of the differences between L1 and L2. No other thing but only the differences between the two languages. That will make the person commit errors in the second language. So what it means, again, I'm re-emphasizing this, that what this means is that the strong version of contrastive analysis, they are saying that all errors that the person who is learning an L2 will make, the errors are as a result of the influence from L1. So every error they make is because of influence from their what? L1. And note that we said earlier that if the person transfers positive forms, then it makes learning easy. If the person transfers negative forms from his language or L1, then it makes learning of the second language more difficult. However, there is also another opinion in contrastive analysis which we call the weak part. The strong version says that all errors made by L2 learners can be traced to differences between L1 and L2. However, there are other people who are of the opinion that while many errors can be predicted by contrasting the two languages, not all errors are caused by L1 interference. Other factors such as developmental errors play a role. So that is, in in Ghana they say certain people from certain places, they speak in a certain way. When they are speaking English, you can tell from their accent that the person is from this place. Not just those of us in Ghana. If somebody from France or somebody from the Francophone countries who speak their local language and French, if they are speaking English, you can tell from their accent. Okay, so certain words may be pronounced as though they were being pronounced in the French or their local languages. Okay, so the weak version of contrastive analysis says that yes, errors can be predicted by looking at the two languages, comparing them, finding their similarities and differences. But not all errors are caused by transfer from their L1. You can't say that if somebody is learning English, let's say the Ga, all errors that the person will make in English language is because the person is transferring all those from Ga. It may be due to other factors, and one of them is developmental errors. As we are growing, when we talk of development, it is the qualitative increase of a human. So let's cast our minds back to when we were students in primary school. There were certain topics that you found difficult to learn in English or in other subject areas. But as you progress to another level where there was some kind of development, you realize that it was easier for you to understand. So you might have made those errors earlier due to your level of development. It's not about age, but about what? Development. Okay. So not all errors, that is according to the weak version, not all errors as a result of transfer from the L1. So let's look at this. So we said that we are looking at examples of contrastive analysis. If we were teaching English language to people whose native language is not English, we are saying that according to contrastive analysis, we must compare the structures. And one of the structure that we mentioned was what? The phonological structure, that is the sound system. So we have an example here. So it says that comparing sounds in L1 and L2 to predict pronunciation difficulties. Students compare sound differences in English languages and English to identify areas where the mother tongue of learners predicts their pronunciation difficulties in English. They say there are, let me use Nigerians, those of you who are familiar with Nigerians. There are certain people from Nigeria who cannot, they pronounce certain words like H. When they are saying certain words, you hear sound like H instead of the H. So it's also similar in our context that if you want to teach, you must compare the sound systems of the two languages. It says that you compare the L1, that is a person's native language, to that of the L2, which is the target language or the second language you are teaching. So that is why some of us, it's difficult for us to, in terms of pronunciation, some words are difficult for us to pronounce as we would do so in the native language. sorry, in the second language. How? So, for example, computer. You all know that a native speaker of English will not say computer, but in our sound system, we don't have the, you've done phonology and phonetics, or phonetics and phonology, that the vowel 12, which is the schwa vowel, does not exist in our local language. So the schwa vowel, which is about 12, does not exist in our local language. So some people find it difficult pronouncing that vowel in English because we don't have it in our language. So instead of, let's say, they say computer, the person will, instead of the person will pronounce it as okay, because that sound does not exist in our local languages. So some people find it difficult to do so. So in terms of morphology, mind you, we are looking at examples of contrastive analysis. So if you were teaching, let's say, English language to someone whose first language is not English, you first compare the sound systems. Okay. Second, you look at the word formation processes. Okay. So it says contrasting word structures to identify potential issues in forming correct grammatical forms. So students compare morphological differences in Ghanaian languages and English to predict morphological differences in learning English. So I spoke about this earlier. Tense formation process. How we form past tense, present tense, present continuous, past perfect, and all that. If you want to teach that, let's say in your local language, you are teaching English, the English you are teaching. So let's say, assume that we had a homogeneous group whose L1 is Ga, and we are teaching English. In terms of morphology, you need to compare the word formation processes to them. So in terms of forming past tense, what are the similarities and differences that will help you identify the difficulties the learner is likely to encounter? Also, plural formation, I've spoken about it. Possessive constructions, I've also spoken. So I spoke about the tense formation and the plural formation. Okay, and also possessive constructions. Okay, possessives. Okay. Then in terms of syntactic structure, so the third one that you must compare in the two languages is what? The syntactic structure or structures of the two languages. So analyze sentence structures to predict common errors in L2 sentence formation. So we have sentence structure. So students identify or recall instances of direct or literal translation from Ghanaian languages to English by English L2 learners. So for example, sometimes people use certain words, let's say cat, in tree or fanti or whatever. I mean the Akan language, that's the tree dialect. Cat means what? Tra. All right. So a learner who has learned, let's say a learner who is a tree speaker, says cat has learned that in English, cat in his or her language is for tra. So if the person wants to say mitra kwaimu, right? Mitra kwaimu, and the person knows that cat in the person's language, tra means cat, mitra kwaimu, all right? Then the person will say, I have cut the road. This is what we're looking at. I have cut the road. But you know that you cannot use cut to mean cross. And I know those of us who come from or who might have come into contact with people from certain places, those of us who teach in rural areas, these English, we hear them. All right. People just direct translation. I'm cutting the road, meaning mitra coin, because the person has transferred the L1, which means track, to English, which is cut, instead of using word cross. And there are many examples that we can give. All right. So that is in terms of the syntax. All right. You can compare them. So let's look at, we'll finish very, very soon, but not now. We have just about, this should be our, we'll finish soon, but not now. So how do we apply contrastive analysis in language teaching as teachers? How do we apply contrastive analysis? Okay, so it helps us predict errors. Before we go to the classroom to teach a certain language, if you were using this, sometimes we use them but not consciously. But from now forward, when you are teaching, you go to the classroom to teach English, you should have in mind that this is an approach that you can use. And how will contrastive analysis influence your teaching? One, it helps you predict errors. So if you are conscious of this, then before going to the classroom, you can anticipate, you can foresee, you can foretell the likely errors learners can make in teaching them English language. The problem with our classroom situation has to do with the fact that we don't have a homogeneous population. So you cannot possibly, though there may be dominant groups there, but they are all not of the same linguistic background. All right. So, but some way, somehow, contrastive analysis will help you anticipate the errors that the people you're going to teach will make based on the differences of the sound structures, the word structures, and the grammatical structures in the L1 and the L2. It also helps in curriculum design. So the curriculum that we use in teaching, they set certain aspects of it has in language, it has its roots in contrastive word analysis, because English is taught as a second language here. So contrastive analysis influences how curriculum is designed. So it says that syllabi were designed based on contrastive analysis predictions, highlighting areas where learners will likely struggle. Okay, that's why we do all these subject verb agreement, past tense markers, and all those aspects, because these are areas that we may likely face difficulty. Now let's look at limitations or shortcomings of shortfalls or shortcomings of the strong version of contrastive analysis. The strong version of contrastive analysis says that all errors committed by second language learners as a result of transfer from their L1 or okay. However, some people disagreed, so they level some predictions against them. It's just like in today in Ghana we have MPP NDC. It's not an MPP person will not agree with NDC, and NDC will also not agree. They may admit that, oh, okay, they are doing well here, but there is always a but when dealing with the groups. So what are some of the criticisms that were leveled against contrastive analysis, the strong version? So they are saying that contrastive analysis. Oh, let me see. So I have a challenge. Just a moment. Okay. I have a network challenge here. Okay, but there was a brief network challenge. So let me check and share. Okay, we are almost done. Almost done, so that you can go and eat your fufu. But I know some have even started eating, so let's finish. So they accuse contrastive analysis of over prediction of errors. So they are saying we learned that the weak form of contrastive analysis is that most errors are as a result of L1 transfer, but not all errors can be attributed to L1 transfers. Some are due to developmental issues. So one of the criticism leveled against contrastive analysis is that they overpredict errors. Because if you say all errors, so the criticism is that not all errors predicted materialize in actual learner performance. So with the strong version of contrastive analysis, okay, they just predict errors. But the criticism is that not all errors that are predicted actually occur. That is, learners of the L2 do not actually make those errors that are predicted. It's just like saying that, oh, this person will make this error, so you write that error down. The person will make this error, so you write. The person will make this error, you write them down. But if the person is learning the language, yes, the person may commit those errors, some, but not all. But contrastive analysis is saying that all errors will be made by the learner, which is not true. That is a criticism that is leveled against them. Yeah, you can predict your errors, but not all the errors will actually be committed. The fact that you've predicted does not mean the learner will commit those errors, because there are other factors that may come into play. Some people may make those errors, others will not. So you cannot say that all errors that are predicted will actually occur. You may predict the error, but the learner will not make that error. But that is what they believe. And another criticism is that they ignored other sources of errors. You know, when people learn, they are learning. You see in our classroom, we say, oh, this one is smarter than this. This one is better than this. Do we do so because, one, it's not just due to one factor. Sometimes a child has come to school, has not eaten. Sometimes a person doesn't have the resources. All right. So, but for contrastive analysis, they are saying that errors committed are only because of L1 transfer. Only because of L1 transfer. No other factor influences that. But the criticism leveled against them is that not all errors are as a result of transfers from L1. There may be other factors or sources that will make someone commit an error in learning the second language. Some of these may be developmental or cognitive factors. So in terms of development, as I explained earlier, the person might not have attained a certain maturation level or has not gained certain level to help him or her understand at that time what you are learning. And there may also be cognitive factors. Those of us who have done special education and all that, you know, some people are born with certain biological issues which impedes their learning. So inside what is in their mind, they may not really be cognitively stable to learn these things. All right. So that's another criticism that is leveled against them. One, they overpredict errors, and that's not all the errors they predict actually occur or are actually committed by the learners. And two, they ignored other sources of errors, other sources that will make people commit errors. They ignore them. They attribute all errors to L1 transfers. They don't consider the cognitive factor. They don't consider the developmental stage of the learner. Okay, the emotional aspect and all that they don't consider. So, as a result of these criticisms, we saw a decline in contrastive analysis. So, what led to the decline? Cognitive approaches. So, new linguistic approaches, as in linguistics, new approaches came into being, which focus on the cognitive aspect of the learner. So, with Chomsky's generative grammar, contrastive analysis approaches were questioned, all right, looking at the behaviorist underpinnings of contrastive analysis. So, it led to the decline of the contrastive analysis. So, with the coming in of cognitive approaches to learning language, which we look at the generative grammar of Noam Chomsky, it questioned the aspect of behaviorism in learning a language. So this contributed to its decline. Okay, so let's look at these questions for your learning. So it says, how did Robert Lado's contrastive analysis apply behaviorist principles to predict second language learning difficulties? Provide examples of how this approach might be used to anticipate errors in phonology or syntax when learning a second language. Contrast the roles of Robert Lado and Charles Carpenter Fries in development of CA. In what ways did Fries' structuralist ideas influence Lado's, and how did Lado extend these ideas into second language teaching? Okay, so that brings us to the end of today's lesson. So today what we have basically done is to look at the foundations of contrastive analysis. And we said that it's a linguistic approach that compares languages to find areas of difficulty. All right. And it is founded on two theories: structural linguistics, or structuralism, and behaviorism. They find contrastive analysis finds its strength from these two theories. In terms of behaviorism, they view language learning as habit formation. And in terms of structuralism, they say that if you want to teach language, compare the structures of the two languages, that's the L1 and the L2. So we have the strong version of contrastive analysis, and we also have the weak version. The strong version says that all errors committed by a learner of a second language is as a result of transfer from his or her L1. Then the weak version says that yes, that is true, but there are other factors that may also cause people to commit errors in learning a second language. So some criticisms were, so we look at how contrastive analysis can be applied in our teaching. So it helps the teacher to anticipate errors that learners are likely to make in the second language. And also it helps in curriculum design. It helps us look at areas that learners are likely to face difficulty in the second language. So there were some allegations, or let's say criticisms, leveled against contrastive analysis. One is that their method of prediction is way beyond, and that not all errors that are committed actually occur in reality. So they over-predict errors. And also, they were told that they ignored other sources of errors, which may be cognitive or developmental. So that brings us to the end of today's lesson. Any question before we draw the curtains down? Yes, please go ahead. Saib,
Doc, yes, I
please.
wanted to ask about this particular L1 and L2. In fact, my L1, when you look at this in the pronoun he and then she, it has
Yes.
distinct feature. Maybe they have different. Yeah, in English, we have he and she to differentiate a male and a female. when you are forming
Yes.
sentences. But my L1 diagram, there is something that we use O to represent the two. So, like if you are to
Yes.
say she is coming or he's coming, and if I'm
Mm.
going to apply my L1, it's going to be Okana, meaning he is
Okay.
coming. Okana also means she's coming. So O represent the two. So can we say this one is
Okay.
morphological?
So yes, this one is morphological. All right, just as you said. So in English, we have him and her, but in your language, the same word is used for the both male and it's gender neutral,
Pronoun. We
right?
use only one pronoun yeah,
Is that what you
meaning
are
the
saying?
two. For the two, he and the
Yes,
she.
to rip. So is the pronoun is gender neutral.
Yes, yes,
Yes, yes. So this will be related to
yes,
the word formation. All right. So the morphology. Okay.
yes. Okay, okay, okay.
So what? So if we should apply the principles of contrastive
So,
analysis, so
can
what
we
it will
say
mean
that?
is
So,
that if we
meaning,
compare
hello.
your yes, we are listening. Yes, Shaibu, we are listening. Okay. So
Yeah, I'm saying that.
yes,
So, can I say that? Can I
yes.
say that if you have only O in the he
Is what
is in English?
you said? Can we say it is what we lost your voice when you got there? Hello. Okay. So maybe tomorrow, if you join, you can ask the question so that we address that. Okay. So tomorrow, what we look at is we will look at theoretical basis of contrastive analysis. So basically, we will look at structuralism and behaviorism into details. So don't forget that today we've spoken about them, but tomorrow we will look at that in detail. All right. Then we look at the criticisms and the legacy of contrastive analysis, which we have also dealt with some part today. So we shall call it a day. Tomorrow, yeah, I spoke about the time. What time will 5 o'clock be okay for us? We can do from 5 to 7 or 7:30. Would that be okay?
Because after
Yes,
7, we
sir.
might have a class.
Okay, okay. So 5 to 7. Okay. So I'll see you same link 5 to 7 tomorrow. Okay. But let's read ahead. So please, the one who has all the 8 slides, let's share with your colleagues. Okay, so that you find time to just glance through before we come. Okay, so thank you very much for your time and enjoy your night. Bye bye.
Thank you, sir. Good night.
Oh, is the class ended? Until then,